Hey, hi, hello. Welcome to Diana Emerson today. We're listening to Caught in the App.
We didn't know whether this was a drug deal. We didn't know whether this was a neighborhood dispute that ended poorly. All we were sure of at the time was that there was a shooting. We were hoping for it to be a lie or a joke. You never think something like this is going to happen to you or your family members.
We have a killer on the loose, and they're actively trying to do something like that again.
My partner opens the app, and that's when he finds the ad and the conversation, but we still don't know who this is.
We have to find that person before they create another victim. The jury ultimately returned a verdict of guilty. We got the maximum penalty that we possibly could get.
Today, an Arapahoe County jury convicted a 20-year-old man of first-degree murder for his role in Joe and Jocelyn Rowland's death. The Rowlands left behind 5 children.
Based on the really violent nature of this case, we had to make decisions quickly to speed up the process to protect the community and try to find the suspect faster.
They were able to track everything that he had been doing. They were able to get pictures, they were able to get data, they were able to pinpoint locations.
When you can look at digital data, it takes away a lot of that mystery. Digital data is the witness, is an unbiased witness in this case.
August 14th, the call came in about 11:45, 11:50 at night. I was at home, I'm asleep. And of course, I'm on call. And so my sergeant informed me there's been a shooting and just gave the address.
Hi, I'm at Cherokee One apartment or condo complexes in Aurora.
That night, there were 2 people that were hired by the apartment complex to just look at the cars, make sure everybody that was parked there was supposed to be there. And they did have a camera in their car. And so as they're patrolling the neighborhood, they do hear the gunshots. And what you can see from the dash camera is a white SUV that ran into a cement post in front of a garage. And this is what's reported on the 911 call.
There's 2 people in the car here. We're gonna check on them, but they both look like they've been shot. I think they're both unresponsive. It doesn't look like there's any movement.
The door opens.
The officers are looking around, trying to see and to document appropriately everything that they're observing.
This looks so there's no broken glass.
One of the officers had written in his report that the 2 victims were holding hands when he got there. All kinds of questions start to come to mind. What kind of relationship did they have? And so, of course, that brings up, is this an affair? Is this an angry ex-boyfriend? Is this an angry ex-girlfriend? And how did we get to where we are right now? When the fire department and the ambulance arrive, what they're focusing on is the treatment of the victims. Time was precious, obviously. And so they were transported to a local hospital. They were pronounced shortly after. The victims were identified as Joseph and Jocelyn Rowland. Joseph was 39 years old and Jocelyn was 40 years old. We figured out that they were a married couple, and so this is husband and wife. The next morning, my partner and I are approaching the house, and when you're going somewhere to tell someone that their loved ones have been killed, you can't sugarcoat it, you can't make it any better. I'm standing at the door, I knock on the door, and a 10-year-old boy answers. I'm asking him, are any adults home? And he says, no, my sister's home with me. And so I ask him, can you please go get your sister? I really need to talk to her, it's really important.
Joe and Jocelyn Rowland are my parents. Jocelyn and my dad have been married since I was 4, and I was 17 when they died. So, I mean, every memory that I have with my dad, I have with her. My dad was the best dad. Yeah, my dad was my best friend. We liked to work on cars together. He would peruse the apps and find cars. He would work on them, and I was the detailer, and it was a great bonding activity for us.
Jocelyn Rowland is my sister, and she is my best friend. My family consisted of 4 children, and Jocelyn was the oldest. Our parents are immigrants from Lebanon who came to Ohio in the 80s. Jocelyn was very motherly to the rest of us. She definitely was the voice of the family as well as the glue of the family. She was a lot of fun. She was energetic and Jocelyn always dreamt about having a massive family. And sure enough, she had a wonderful, large family. Their house was just filled with love and joy. And people, always people. Jocelyn Joe's door was open to anyone that ever needed a place to stay.
My parents were the most generous people I've ever met. Whenever we'd go anywhere, they would always invite all of our friends with us. Jocelyn would always just say, like, hey, we have 5. What's 5 more? In the summer, we used to go boating every single weekend. On August 15th of 2020, my family and I were planning on going boating at Chatfield Lake. That morning, when I realized that there were detectives and cops at my door, was honestly, I thought there was a car accident down the road and they were asking if we had like a Ring doorbell camera or something that could have gotten footage.
I ask her, are there any family that live close by? And she says no. And I said, okay, is there anyone else that you trust that you can call to come here?
One of my friends' moms answered. She got there and she sat down next to me and she held my hand.
I tell Madison why I'm there, that her mom and dad have been killed.
I was literally like pinching myself to see if this was a dream or what was going on or like what kind of nightmare am I in. I was in shock. I remember I just like broke down. But I wanted to hold myself together in order to answer the questions that I needed to.
She was crying. She wasn't hysterical, though. She was still able to talk, to ask questions. And she was 17, and the Harab just told her that her parents had been killed. And she was actually able to help us with the investigation that rarely happens.
I told them at one point that night, my parents called me and they just told me they would be home a little bit later.
At this point, Madison gives us very important information about where her parents were the night of the murder.
If I had been 2 minutes earlier, then it would have been me with my dad, and my siblings would still have their mom.
I'm a Chief Deputy District Attorney at the 18th DA's office. And so we work very close with the major crimes unit of the Aurora Police Department anytime there's a homicide. I got the call probably about an hour after the actual murder. The two victims, Joseph and Jocelyn Rowland, had already been carried away.
Once the ambulance is gone, we try to canvass to see if there's any video. And that's where new technology is coming into play, because everyone has a surveillance camera, whether it's a residence, whether it's a business, whether it's a pole camera on the side of the street. There's cameras everywhere. We were able to contact a man who did have the Ring doorbell.
When I was looking at the video that night, there were two vehicles that were involved. One of them was a dark colored SUV, and it had some very distinctive rims on it. The other vehicle was the Rowland's vehicle.
The driver of the dark SUV exits and walks back towards the white SUV where the two victims were seated. There's a conversation.
You couldn't hear any of the conversation that was going on. What you could hear, though, is 5 distinct gunshots.
Watching that Ring video, we can hear the gunshots and the screaming. Jocelyn screams, "Oh God, oh God." Could we see license plates? No, we can't. Could we see who was driving those cars? No, we couldn't. So that's where the investigation began. What kind of cars have these rims on them? Detectives also locate a white Bank of America envelope, and there was $1,300 cash in there. Written on the front of the envelope was the number 5 and the letter K, and that means to me that there should have been $5,000 in that envelope. I don't know why there was money left behind, but we know that this was a robbery. We didn't have a lot of information to go on at that point, but we did find a phone in the car. Not only has the use of the cell phones evolved, but what we're able to access from these companies is also evolving and changing. Whereas before, we would use a cell phone to make a phone call or to send a text message. Now we're using a cell phone almost as more of a portable computer. And so that's kind of influencing the way that we're investigating crime. We had a conversation with Madison, and she tells us that her dad has a hobby that he buys and sells cars on the side and uses resale apps like Letgo, like Craigslist. Madison told me he was buying a blue RAV4 on Letgo. And now we've narrowed it down to not only what application Joseph was using, but what kind of car he's looking at buying.
After the detectives left, I was just trying to piece together in my mind how I could tell my siblings this. And each of them had different reactions. There was shock, there was crying, there was confusion. I mean, my youngest brother was like 3.5 at the time. I was just 17.
The morning that I got the call, I noticed I had missed about 10 phone calls from my brother. I called him back, and he then proceeded to tell me that Jocelyn and Joe were dead. I remember hanging up the phone and just collapsing. Everything felt surreal. You never think something like this is going to happen to you or your family members.
So at this point in the investigation, we have Joseph's phone, and my partner opens the Letgo app, and that's when he finds the conversation. That's when we first see the name James Worthy.
James Worthy was selling a Toyota RAV4 that looked exactly like the RAV4 that we saw in the surveillance videos. It was a dark RAV4 and had the same distinctive rims. James Worthy was a brand new person to let go. They had no prior reviews, no prior sales.
Within that conversation, we know that Joseph is asking what condition the car is in, how many miles, and more information about the actual sale of the car.
Joseph Rowland asked to meet in a well-lit area, and from the text message we gathered, they actually went to that location. The last text message was, "I'm here." We knew from the Let Go app what the VIN number was and the registration and the license plate of that vehicle. The RAV4 we discovered after we got the registration was stolen out of Denver a few days before. And not only that, that RAV4 was in police custody in the evidence bay because they recovered it that night after the suspect had tried to light it on fire.
We frequently see things lit on fire in an attempt to get rid of evidence. And so we have our crime lab and the arson investigators out, and they go through the car looking for more evidence. They collected a gas can from the front seat and COVID mask. They swabbed for DNA, and then all of the items were sent to a lab. That amount of evidence and what we were asking them to do takes a little bit of time. And so we wait. It could be months. It could be up to a year. While all of this is going on, my partner is monitoring the Let Go app, and he discovers that James Worthy is no longer an active profile, but he finds a different profile that has the exact same vehicle for sale.
There was an individual by the name of Jessica Harlan trying to set up the same type of buy that the Rowlands had gone into. The exact same photographs that were used to sell the vehicle in James Worthy's post, the vehicle that the police had in custody, was still being sold on Let Go.
This is concerning for us. It's exigent circumstances, meaning that there is a current danger to the public. And so we were able to get information a little bit quicker. I wrote an exigent warrant to Let Go, and I asked for the new information on Jessica Harlan. Is this the same account? And I was given the information that yes, this is the same account, only the profile name has changed.
We decided that we were going to try to set up a sting to turn the tables on the seller before they create another victim. We had an undercover officer get a Let Go account and start communicating with Jessica Harlan. The suspect took the bait. They started having a conversation. Let's meet up. Let's sell this. Our undercover officer was there. We had SWAT ready to swoop in. It's just waiting for him to show up. Typically, when someone commits a murder, they are trying to get out of town as fast as possible. So it was quite a shock that this person is trying to lure somebody else in to rob from them, and if things didn't go well, potentially harm them, like to Joseph and Jocelyn Rowland. Essentially, we have a killer on the loose, and they're actively trying to do something like that again. We decided that we were going to try to set up a sting to turn the tables on Jessica Harlan, who was trying to sell that RAV4 that we knew was in police evidence at that time. At least initially, the suspect took the bait. We had a location set. Our undercover officer was there, just waiting for him to show up. But at the last moment, he bailed. Maybe it was he realized he didn't have a vehicle to sell or pawn off as that Toyota RAV4 at that moment, and he got spooked off that way. But unfortunately, that was not the end of this. He was still out there, so we had to try something different.
The uncertainty that was felt during the time of all the unknown was excruciating. It was paranoia. We didn't know who to trust and who to talk to.
Everything was such a blur. The hardest part was not knowing who it was, what happened, anything. And so I couldn't sleep because it was supposed to be me with him. I was supposed to go with my dad that night, but Jocelyn went instead. And that's something that I think about all the time, because that if I had been 2 minutes earlier, then it would have been me with my dad, and my siblings would still have their mom.
I call Andy McDermott, and he's known for his experience with digital data.
Our motivation is to bring justice to the family that was impacted by this. When we review that conversation log between the suspect in this case and the victim, we identify the IP address that was used by the suspect, and we find that it's issued by Verizon Wireless. An IP address is the number to identify specific devices that connect to a network. The next step is to find out what device on the Verizon network was using the IP address during the time of the interaction on Letgo. So I contact Verizon and request this data immediately. But then also, there was a Google Gmail address that was used to set up the Letgo account. So I also requested subscriber information from Google. The Verizon IP address that was used to access the Letgo account was an older version. And these older versions of IP addresses are in different markets simultaneously. So I learned that we're going to receive about 164 different phone numbers that accessed this IP address. There could be someone in Aurora, Colorado, who's using this Verizon IP address to access Letgo and communicate with our victim. At the same time, someone in Vermont could be using that same IP address to watch a movie online. At the same time, Google returned information back to us related to the Gmail address that was used to set up the Letgo account.
They were able to supply a phone number and a name. And so then the ball was rolling much quicker.
The name associated with that account was Kyrie Brown. I have the number used to set up Kyrie Brown's Google account, so I compare it to the list of 164 numbers that use the IP address, and that number exists in that list. That's success. It makes you realize that you might be able to find this person before they hurt somebody else.
Kyrie Brown didn't have a permanent residence or a permanent job, so there wasn't a great way to go track him down immediately.
And so we had to rely on the technology. Now we need to figure out if the phone's being used. And if the phone's being used, where? Andy was able to again write a warrant under exigent circumstances.
And so within about 45 minutes or so, I start receiving data from Verizon in my email with estimated locations for this phone. They provide you the location and the estimated radius. And I could see immediately that that phone is still in Aurora, Colorado, and we make plans to go locate that device and ultimately the person who has it. I received the first estimated location for this device on August 26th around 9 or 9:30 p.m. We received a couple of consecutive pings in the area of Colfax and Billings in Aurora. I pulled into a gas station where there were some estimated locations related to that device. Several minutes go by and I'm not receiving any new pings. I notice that there's a sedan parked next to me. The person who's driving the vehicle is looking up at me. And for a very brief moment in time, I can see the side of his face. I had an old booking photo I was working off of, and it felt like it might be Kyrie Brown. But I'm not 100% sure. I'm certainly not sure enough to stop the vehicle or contact him. Before that next ping comes in, that vehicle leaves the parking lot. He makes a turn into a neighborhood. I give him a minute or so to get down the street. I found that over the years of doing surveillance, sometimes having props with you is a good way to blend into the community. I grew up riding skateboards, used them before on surveillance, and so I take my skateboard and I skate across the street where I believe he turned. Sure enough, there's the vehicle that I was trying to find. There's a male subject standing behind that vehicle. He paid no attention to me on the skateboard. I just kind of blended in. I then realized it's too dark to see who it is. I cannot tell if it's Kyrie Brown or not. So I returned back to my vehicle. We should have received 2 pings by now, and we weren't getting any. That's a strong indication that the device might have been turned off. The next day, we brought the entire task force out. We're receiving these updated location pings, and we can tell the phone is in a neighborhood in Aurora. The tracking equipment allows us to fine-tune that, make it more accurate. And through the course of that process, investigators can determine that the device is very likely inside this detached garage behind a residence in Aurora.
So at that point, Detective McDermott got the SWAT team ready to apprehend him.
We're now getting very close to resolving this piece of the investigation and making sure no one else gets hurt.
He's one street to the north, they're going east that way. Good drive.
We have an individual who murdered two people, who set them up to rob them and then murder them. So it makes it an extremely urgent situation that we have to find that person before they create another victim.
We're receiving these updated location pings related to Kyrie Brown's phone. We can determine that the device is very likely inside this detached garage. So while we're waiting for our SWAT team to get set up and make their approach to the residence, we see Kyrie Brown come out of the garage. He's talking on his phone. He looks up and down the alley as if he's waiting for someone to come. At the same time, there's a white pickup traveling north through the alley. Kyrie Brown jumps in the passenger side of that vehicle, and they leave the area.
We have an unknown person in the driver's seat. We don't know what this other person's involvement is. Are they friends with Kyrie? Did this person know that Kyrie was involved in the shooting?
And we're at that point where we have to decide, is it worth chasing this person and maybe putting the community at risk, or do we put the community at more risk by letting him go? Based on the really violent nature of this case, we decided that it was worth pursuing it.
He's one street to the north, they're going east that way. He's going to go south somewhere.
That vehicle noticed the police were following him and started a high-speed chase through North Aurora.
So the chase leaves North Aurora and it moves into Denver. Very high rates of speed, weaving in and out of traffic.
I could hear on the radio that he's traveling 60 and 70 miles an hour in a residential neighborhood.
He's in the eastbound oncoming lanes through Xenia.
Going the wrong way on different roads, driving through stop signs, red lights, things like that.
He's going to crash. Good drive. Good drive, baby. We'll be contact. We'll wait here. We'll be contact 29th and Central. We're hitting it now.
Eventually, the Aurora Police Department had to do what's called a pit maneuver.
Your hands on me! Your hands on me! Don't move your hands!
Both the driver as well as Kyrie Brown was taken into custody at that point.
After the chase is over, both Kyrie and the driver are transported to our headquarters building, and we identify the driver and we interview him, and we figured out he had nothing to do with the shooting of the Rowlands. He happened to think that the police were after him for something completely different, and that's why he refused to stop.
I spent my time going through the historical data from Verizon in terms of where Kyrie Brown's device had been in the past. And my goal was to compare that to dates, times, and locations that we knew were important in this case.
We needed to be able to see if there was any kind of a similarity. Is there one piece of information that's present at all of the locations?
We're looking at 4 critical events. One was the night the RAV4 was stolen. The second event was the meeting between the Rowlands and the suspect at a shopping mall in Aurora. The third event unfortunately, was the homicide. It occurred in a different part of Aurora. And then the fourth event was where the RAV4 was burned and then recovered. If his phone was only at the homicide, there's value in that for sure. But it's more powerful when it's at all these other locations that we can tie to the crime. It's not possible really to quickly move through that data manually. It's not intuitive for a human being to just look at that.
I remember a conversation with Andy, and I remember him saying, I'm so frustrated, and he might have even dropped a couple of F-bombs because for whatever reason, he couldn't put Kyrie at all of the locations. So I remember Andy saying, I have to call you back.
And so we use a tool called Nighthawk Leo Vision that allows us to import all kinds of digital data into one place. In this case, Verizon cell phone records, along with LetGo third-party sales application data.
I remember it seemed like eternity. We're waiting for the phone to ring.
And now I can see both of those things in one place, associate them with the owner of that account, in this case, Kyrie Brown. And now finally I can see Kyrie Brown's phone at all of these 4 places.
Andy calls me back and he says, we've got it. I've got him at all locations.
I think Joseph Rowland and Jocelyn were trying to play it safe when they were buying something off LetGo. But they let their guard down, I think, when they saw Kyrie Brown. He was 18 years old. He had turned 18 just a few months prior to the murders. Just because someone looks like they're nice and looks like they're not going to do anything to you doesn't mean that's the case.
My partner and I sit down with him, and we're in the interview room, and he looks so young. We start asking him what happened earlier today. And I remember him saying he was hanging out with some friends. And when he and the driver of the truck left, he was going to look at his speaker.
When you start driving, he was like, I don't fool. I didn't think of it the first time talking to him. So do you know this guy? No, I was just trying to buy a speaker off of him.
And so at that point, Kyrie didn't think we knew who he was. We're asking just a bunch of general questions.
If you were somebody that was anonymous, so AirPods to pull. Tesla's for sure or two. Okay, so it's I have stuff that have you ever been living
And we know this isn't true. Then we ask him, have you ever sold a car on social media?
Posted on Facebook.
So we're continuing to ask him questions.
Did you have to have an email address to sell on Marketplace? Do you have anyone?
He gave us an email address. It was not the email address that we had received from all of the warrants that we wrote.
Where are these specials coming from?
Let us have a minute and then I'll bring some stuff and we'll talk about that. Okay?
I tell my partner we're going to show him the email address and the phone number and the ad from LetGo, and let's see what he says. And so my partner slides the piece of paper with the ad across the table. Did you post this ad, Kyrie?
No, I saw things a lot. So these can't be right. Well, when did you sell it? 7 minutes ago. Okay.
He starts talking about a car that he put on social media for sale, but it was months ago. And so now we kind of know this is what we're going to ask him more questions about. Tell me about the car that you sold.
What's your answer? Yeah, how much did you sell it for? $10 grand. says 5 grand. Almost.
And my partner slides the vehicle identification number across and tells Kyrie, we know this is the car that was reported stolen. And so we start to kind of throw the information that we know not to be true back at him.
Yeah, I think you're being honest with me. You're being completely honest. About what part? Did you ever meet up with anyone? Did you try to film this? I know that's me. What did you say if I said I had information that you wanted? I know I could bring that down there.
And there is one point where Kyrie kind of puts his head in his hands and he doesn't want to answer any more questions. And I slide closer to him and I tell him,
Harry Brown said that he actually met Joseph Rowland at the mall. And he had told Joseph Rowland to follow him back to a neighborhood in Aurora.
They followed us back. Until he got the right title for the car. To follow back and get the right title for you.
But when they were at that location, he didn't actually have the title because the vehicle was stolen.
Kyrie tells us that yes, he was present at the shooting, but he initially says that it was not him that shot them. Kyrie said that it was a friend that he picked up on the street corner. And so at this point, we've got information from multiple sources, from Google, from Verizon, from LetGo. We know that there's no phone conversation with anybody else. And we know that there was not anybody else on that side of the car because we have a video. So we didn't think that this part of the story was true.
So meaning that we know about any of these people in this car? Is he the female?
And so we confront him with that information. And I give him a minute to kind of figure out what he's going to do. And he starts to tell us how that night unfolded. There were little things that Kyrie would admit to. And so he initially admitted to being at the shooting, but it was just supposed to be a robbery, that it wasn't supposed to be a shooting. Then tried to say he wasn't the one that actually shot the gun. And that's when my partner was able to say, based on the video, we know there weren't two people there. Eventually, Kyrie confessed to the shooting of the Rowlands. As the car is rolling down the street and approaching that garage, Kyrie reaches into the console, and that's when he takes the money that Joseph had kind of laid out on his lap as he's trying to facilitate the deal for the car. And Kyrie claimed that shooting Jocelyn was an accident, that he didn't mean to. But he fired 5 rounds into a car at relatively close range where 2 people were sitting, accidental or not. Kyrie, you shot 2 people and you killed them. After that, he runs back to the RAV4 and he drives the car up to the other street and he lights the car on fire and he runs away.
The technology and the evidence that we had really boxed him in to what actually happened in this case. He had nothing left to do but tell us the truth.
It's important to my partner and I that we notify the family that we made an arrest. And so it's a tragic day. So let's go tell them it's over.
The detectives came in and asked the entire family to sit down in the living room. They wanted to make sure that we heard it first from them.
I remember them just looking in our eyes and saying, thank you, we appreciate it. We found after the arrest and looking through social media, Kyrie Brown had a Facebook page and had actually posted pictures around the time that the crime had occurred of himself.
We were able to show Kyrie Brown had taken selfies holding a wad of money that looked like to be about the exact amount of money that he had stolen, as well as videos with firearms that we believe are the same type of caliber that were used in this murder.
And so those were exhibits that were used in the trial.
The jury ultimately returned a verdict of guilty. Kyrie Brown was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder. The sentencing happened a few months later. It was a particularly heart-wrenching sentencing. Murder cases are tough in the sense that there is no way to make the victim's family whole again. At the end of the day, the defendant was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder of Joseph Rowland, and then he was sentenced to a consecutive life in prison without the possibility of parole for Jocelyn Rowland.
The 4 younger of the children all left Aurora. They ended up going with my sister. They didn't want to be known as the kids whose parents were murdered.
I wanted to be here so they had somebody in the state that could go visit their graves. But I go for holidays, I go for Father's Day, I bring my guitar. My dad and I, our song was Sitting on the Dock of the Bay by Otis Redding, and I have that tattooed on my back to honor him. And I actually have one for Jocelyn as well. It's her birth flower.
He didn't just take 2 people, he took an entire community that they created.